We are back in the black hole of real estate, and I saw something the other day that said, and of course it was online, so you can either believe it or not, but it said that investment properties are dead. This is your host, Ron Wysokarski, for the black hole of real estate, and I read that. I had to read it again and again, and I took a look, below the surface, and I read a little bit, listened a little bit, and thought about it. And the author's point was that investments on the scale and profit level that they were accustomed to, well, that just doesn't work anymore. And what they reason is that the interest rates are too high and the purchase prices are too high, and they can't overcome the debt service when compared to the rent that they receive. In other words, it's very hard to have positive cash flow with smaller down payments, 20% or less, with the interest rates where they are. And I don't disagree with him, but I also want to use the word small-minded thinking. Because when somebody looks at the debt service and says, well, geez, I've got to cover my mortgage and my property manager, and I still have to make money for myself. And that's a great way to look at it, and you should. But they're leaving out a couple of key components, and I want to go deep into that today when I talk about it. Now, if you're investing with cash into real estate and you know what the rent is, you've got a really good idea of what your cash flow is going to look like, because the only debt service you have will be your taxes and insurance, typical maintenance, HOA fees, replacement for big ticket items, which you should be looking at in the beginning when you purchase the property. And a lot of investors will go through and take care of the roof, the plumbing, the heating and electrical up front to get all of that, potential accelerated depreciation, which is another word we'll get to, into the first year. So it could make a great tax strategy on that. But at the very least, if you're acquiring a property, you should have an inspection, or at least you should have if you're a savvy investor and think you don't need an inspection, fine, but you still should know what that costs. And for me, the acquisition price plus whatever your deferred maintenance is for the first 2-3 years, again, the big ticket items, you pay $200 for a property, you're putting $30 into it for roof and mechanics, HVAC, fine, and then your acquisition is $230. Simple. And if it's all cash and you're looking for that 1% return, then if you have $2,300 in rent coming in, that meets the 1% rule. If you're paying $200, a lot of people say you need $2,000 in rent. The 1% rule, it lives. If you want to build into it some of the other costs, be my guest. But the 1% rule, not a terrible guide. I often look at the 0.8% rule, and that's just my own personal rule, Ron's rule. But let's just suppose you paid $200 for a property and $1,600 was coming back. That's 0.8%. Well, where's the rest of it coming from? I would say that in most years, there will be at least 2% appreciation in the property. And that would get you to the 10%. And not in the traditional investor way, but it would get you there. With markets projected even now to go up 3% this year, this is NAR, they're economic advisors. They're saying 3% this year, 4% next year return on investment. So prices going up. That's good. So if you know there's appreciation of 3% and then 4%, that could help. And if you're getting most of the money back on the rent, that's great. But what if you were having to come out of pocket $100, $200 a month to make the deal work? Would that stop you? And this is the small-minded thinking part. So let me explain why I'm saying that. Let's suppose that you paid $200,000 for a property, and when it's all said and done after it's rented, you have to write a check every month for $200. But you're not lifting a finger. You're paying for your property manager. In essence, you bought it and you're watching it. How do you make up this $200? Well, I'm going to think that in the next year, you're going to raise the rent a little bit. And so that would cover some of it. But if you got a mortgage, my suspicion is you've got $200 coming off the mortgage. on a given month. If you're paying $1,600 or $2,000 for a mortgage or whatever that is it reasonable to think at least a couple $100 is coming off the principal? So if you're getting all but $200 back, so you're within $200, but there's at least $200, if not more, coming off the principal, then that works a lot like a 401k or any other savings account. Because you're getting most of your cash back to pay for the mortgage, you're investing a couple $100 a month, but the principal's coming down at least that. To me, that's a win. And as rents continue to increase, then that number's going to change. You're not precluded from refinancing somewhere down the road if rates come down. And a lot of lenders are offering a 5-year program where if the rates go down in the next 5 years, they're waiving the lending fees to reduce the interest rate. So for me, it makes a lot of sense to at least investigate this. And even if it doesn't fit the traditional model of 1% rules or always have positive cash flow, ... Now, there's another way to do it. And a wise old investor told me, if you want to be positive cash flow on every single property that you own, then you control that by the size of your down payment. And if you know the rent is going to be $1,800, then put enough money down to make sure that your mortgage payment and your taxes and insurance together are $1,700 or $1,600 or whatever you want your cash flow to be. Just use a bigger down payment, and that will work. So now we're traveling through this piece where we're saying, well, geez, you know what? I don't have enough cash to buy it cash, and I want a good return on investment. We know about the 1% rule and Ron's 0.8% rule. Okay, so now we can salt that away for a moment. And if we were financing and we knew that we can cash flow a little bit or go a little bit negative, we can make that small contribution every month. And for me, would you spend $200 a month to control a $200,000 asset that you're not likely to ever make a payment on if you keep it rented? In 10, 20, 30 years down the road, whatever the length of your mortgage is, that's money back to you. So if you're in the early years of wealth building and you're in your 20s, 30s, or even 40s, that property is likely to be paid off by the time that you would retire, let's say at 70-ish. It's a long ways down the road. And at that point, it's straight cash to pocket. You got all the cash flow in retirement. And by the way, you control the asset too. And that $200,000 property, I'm sure it's worth at least $200 down the road. Could be double that. So that's a way to build wealth and control assets at the same time for a very small amount of money. And when you look at that, not only do you have all that appreciation in there and the cash flow coming in, but we haven't even talked about your taxes, because you can also depreciate on your taxes. Now, I'm not the CPA. Talk to your tax advisor about this, but I would suggest to you that if you have a negative cash flow and you have expenses for mortgage and other things, you're probably going to get a good write-off at the end of the tax year, which could save you real money. And if it saved you, I don't know, $2,500 in taxes because of the write-offs, well, there's your $200 a month right there coming right back to you at the end of the year. So if you paid it into that account, $200 a month in the mortgage, it's also coming down in the mortgage, but then you get the tax return back of a couple $100. It's a wash. So it's a lot of ways to overcome the illusion that you're losing money because it's not cash flowing. If you're looking at your net worth increase, and I would, does the asset go up? Sure. Does the principal balance on the mortgage go down? Absolutely. Do you get money back at tax time? Absolutely. Triple win. I think even if you're not cash flowing, you might actually be net money ahead, increasing your net worth over the next year if you were to go out there and make a purchase on an investment property today. And if you don't fit in the traditional mortgage where you go to the bank and you give them all your pay stubs and tax returns, there's a number of lenders out there that will do these things that are called DSCR loans, and they're debt service basically. They're based on the rent that's going to come in. You'll put a certain down payment, probably 20% or so down, and then you'd probably pay a less than favorable rate when compared to a bank rate, but you still get the loan, a lot easier credit process to go through. And they're designed for investors that are working off a cash flow, because let's face it, if you had 5 or 10 properties, at some point your income can't pay for them all. But the rental income can, and not every mortgage application is going to count all of your rental income. So these programs are specialized lenders that actually help you with that. That's probably a topic for a different program, different podcast that we can talk more about it. But right now, to me, investment properties are not dead. And purchasing them right now at a time when a lot of people aren't purchasing them might absolutely make a lot of sense right now. So if you're a would-be investor or a repeat investor and you've got interest in this topic, definitely put a message below. Let me know. We can absolutely help you with those things to guide you through the process. Give us a like. Definitely subscribe. We want to hear more from you about how we can make this podcast exactly what you want it to be to help build your wealth building strategy in real estate. This is your host, Ron Wojciechowski for the Black Hole of Real Estate.